Hey guys, tonight we're going to travel back to a time when our planet was a ghost of its former self, to witness what the world was like on the morning after the apocalypse. Imagine standing on a desolate plain 251.9 million years ago. The air itself is thin and tastes of sulfur. The sun beats down from a hazy brownish sky, and the world around you is unnervingly quiet. This is not the end of the world. This is the first day after. The cataclysm that caused this wasn't a sudden fiery rock from space like the one that killed the dinosaurs. No, this was a slow, creeping death that came from within the Earth itself, a planetary autoimmune disease. For thousands upon thousands of years, the land itself had split open in what is now Siberia, pouring out a sea of lava and choking the atmosphere with poison. This relentless eruption triggered a runaway greenhouse effect that boiled the seas and suffocated the land, wiping the slate of life almost completely clean. So how does a planet recover from near total annihilation? What kind of life clings on in a global wasteland? And what does it mean to be a survivor when the world you've inherited is a ghost of its former self? Thanks to an incredible amount of geological and fossil detective work, tonight we are going to walk through this disaster world together, day by agonizing day. Frankly, if you were dropped here without a specialized life support suit, the combination of heat, low oxygen, and toxic air would render you unconscious in about 2 minutes, which is probably for the best. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That small click sends a big signal to the algorithm that long-form, serious educational content still matters. And to me, it's an incredibly meaningful show of support. Thank you so much for helping keep this channel going strong. It always fascinates me to see where you're all tuning in from. Let me know in the comments where you are in the world and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The event that created this wasteland is known as the Permian Triassic extinction, or more appropriately, the Great Dying. The culprit wasn't a typical cone-shaped volcano, but something far more vast and insidious. The Siberian Traps. Picture massive, continent-spanning cracks in the Earth's crust, not exploding, but relentlessly weeping molten rock for hundreds of thousands of years. The scale of this is hard to comprehend. Geologists estimate that enough lava poured out to cover the entire continental United States in a layer a kilometer thick. This wasn't a singular event. It was a geological siege that the planet's biosphere simply could not withstand. The lava itself was only part of the problem. The real killer was the cascade of climatic horrors it unleashed. The eruptions vented truly staggering amounts of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, triggering a runaway greenhouse effect that sent global temperatures soaring. This was accompanied by relentless, searing acid rain that stripped forests bare and poisoned the soil. As the planet heated up, the oceans began to suffer. A warmer ocean holds less dissolved oxygen, and soon the deep seas became vast, stagnant, anoxic zones. Scientists still argue over the precise sequence and dominance of each kill mechanism, but a leading theory paints a truly horrifying picture. In these oxygen-starved depths, sulfate-reducing bacteria began to thrive, and their metabolic waste product was vast quantities of toxic hydrogen sulfide gas. Imagine the smell of billions upon billions of rotten eggs. This poisonous gas eventually bubbled up from the depths, erupting out of the ocean's surface and suffocating what little animal life was left on land. When the dust finally settled, the final tally was apocalyptic. Studies have found that a staggering 96% of all marine species were gone. On land, it was so severe that in total, 9 out of every 10 animals perished. To put that in perspective, this was the only mass extinction in Earth's history to cause a significant die-off of insects. When even the cockroaches are struggling, you know the situation is uniquely dire. The world you're standing in now is the inheritance of the survivors. A silent, empty planet, waiting to see if life had the strength to begin again. The geological age you have stepped into is called the Induan. It represents the first 2 million years following the peak of the Great Dying, a span of time from roughly 251.9 to 249.9 million years ago. But you should not think of this as a period of recovery. It is more accurate to imagine it as an era of planetary shock, a prolonged 2 million year-long state of PTSD, where the biosphere was locked in a stunned and simplified state. The world map itself is alien to you. There are no familiar continents, no Atlantic or Indian Oceans. There is only Pangea, one lonely, colossal landmass stretching from pole to pole, surrounded by a single globe-spanning super-ocean called Panthalassa. The sheer scale of this continent creates a climate of brutal extremes. With most of the land situated thousands of miles from the moderating influence of the ocean, the interior of Pangea has become a desert so immense it would make our Sahara look like a modest sandbox. Your most immediate and agonizing sensation, however, would be the heat. This is a hothouse world running a planetary fever. The same greenhouse gases that suffocated the Permian world are still thick in the atmosphere, trapping solar radiation with terrifying efficiency. Down at the equator, the ocean's surface has become a simmering bath. This isn't just speculation. Geochemists can read the planet's ancient thermostat by analyzing the oxygen isotopes trapped in the fossilized shells of tiny marine creatures. Their findings suggest the average sea surface temperature in the tropics would have been a staggering 40 degrees Celsius, or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the same temperature that modern health organizations warn you to never exceed in a hot tub. The oceans were literally a planetary spa, minus any of the relaxation. And on land, it was even worse. Away from the slight relief of the coast, daytime temperatures could routinely break 60 degrees Celsius, or 140 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to slow cook meat on the bone. But the raw temperature alone doesn't capture the true lethality. You would be experiencing a deadly wet bulb event. It's a measure that combines heat and humidity, and it dictates the point at which a body can no longer cool itself through sweating. In the humid coastal regions of this hot house Earth, the wet bulb temperature would have been so high that your sweat would no longer evaporate. With no way to shed heat, your core temperature would rise uncontrollably, and your internal organs would literally begin to cook. You would be dead from hypothermia within hours. This oppressive heat is the engine driving the world's aridity. The central part of the continent is dominated by a vast mountain range, the Central Pangean Mountains, a monstrous spine of rock loftier than the Himalayas. Geologists still debate the exact boundaries of this super desert, but all models agree that these mountains created an immense rain shadow, blocking any moisture-rich winds from the ocean from ever reaching the continent's heart. The result is a wasteland of unimaginable scale. Arrakis from the science fiction novel Dune has nothing on this place. For thousands upon thousands of miles, the landscape would be nothing but endless seas of silent, shifting dunes, baked red under the hazy sun. Life here is not just absent, It feels impossible. This is the stage upon which the survivors must now eke out their existence. A silent, empty, and blisteringly hot new world. Even if you could somehow tolerate the crushing heat, your next, more immediate problem would be the simple act of taking a breath. The air itself is your enemy. You try to inhale deeply, but your lungs feel empty, unable to draw enough substance from the thin, hostile atmosphere. The delicate balance of gases that sustains us today has been shattered. The air in your time is a comfortable 21% oxygen. Here, in the early Induan, that number has plummeted to a terrifying low of around 12%, perhaps 15% on a good day. That might not sound like a catastrophic drop, but physiologically, it's the difference between life and death. You've been instantly transported to the physiological equivalent of a Himalayan death zone, far above 8,000 meters, but without any chance to acclimatize. Your body immediately panics. A modern human, even a fit one, begins to suffer serious cognitive and physical impairment when oxygen drops below 16%. At 12%, you are in critical danger. Your heart begins to hammer against your ribs, a desperate, rapid pulse trying to circulate what little oxygen your blood can absorb. Your breathing becomes a frantic, shallow pant. A crushing headache begins to build behind your eyes as the blood vessels in your brain dilate in a futile attempt to get more oxygen. A wave of nausea and fatigue washes over you. Every movement feels like you're wading through setting concrete. If you were to remain here, your fate would be grim and certain. The prolonged oxygen starvation would lead to a condition mountaineers dread: high-altitude pulmonary and cerebral edema. Your body, in its desperation, would start leaking fluid from your blood vessels into the surrounding tissues. Your lungs would slowly begin to fill with fluid, a sensation akin to drowning on dry land. At the same time, your brain would begin to swell inside your skull, leading to confusion, hallucinations, and eventually a final, merciful darkness. You are not just in an alien world, you are in a world that is actively and efficiently trying to kill you with every breath you take. But the lack of oxygen is only half the story. The air is also a poisonous cocktail. The volcanic eruptions may have subsided, but the atmosphere is still saturated with their byproducts. There's a constant acrid, metallic tang on your tongue from lingering sulfur compounds and punishingly high levels of carbon dioxide. The smell of the world is one of sulfurous volcanic smog, mixed with the deeply unsettling, faint scent of rot wafting in from the anoxic oceans. It is the smell of a planet's sickness. And looking up, the sky offers no comfort. The sun is a pale, washed-out disk, its light diffused by a permanent atmospheric haze of volcanic aerosols and dust. But this haze is a treacherous filter. A fringe theory among some atmospheric chemists suggests this haze might have given the sky a sickly brownish or even purplish tint, a perpetual dreary twilight. More importantly, the very chemistry of the Great Dying has attacked the planet's protective shielding. The massive volcanic plumes blasted chlorine and bromine-bearing gases into the stratosphere, which acted as powerful catalysts, destroying the ozone layer. Without this shield, the planet's surface is being bombarded by lethal levels of ultraviolet B radiation. Any exposed skin would suffer severe burns in minutes. For the life trying to survive here, this UV radiation is a constant stressor, scorching delicate plant tissues and causing mutations in the DNA of any creature exposed to the sun. It is a world without a safe haven, where the air suffocates you, the heat cooks you, and the sunlight itself is poison. As you stand on this desolate coastline, the hazy air growing thick with an oppressive humidity, you might notice the horizon darkening with an unsatural speed. The wind begins to pick up, not like a normal storm, but with a low, mournful howl that seems to come from everywhere at once. You are about to witness one of the most terrifying theoretical phenomena of this hothouse Earth, the birth of a hypercane. This is not a hurricane. A hurricane is a tempest. A hypercane is an extinction-level event in weather form, a storm so powerful it is literally a geological force. The science behind these theoretical monsters is born from the planet's extreme fever. Meteorologists hypothesize that when sea surface temperatures reach a critical threshold of 50 degrees Celsius, or 122 degrees Fahrenheit, the normal physics of a hurricane break down. The sheer amount of heat and water vapor being pumped into the atmosphere creates a convective engine of unimaginable power, a feedback loop of escalating violence that spins up into something apocalyptic. The enclosed, shallow waters of the Paleotethys Sea to your east were a perfect incubator for such tempests. As the storm approaches, you would struggle to even remain standing. The wind speeds are not measured in the hundreds of miles per hour, but approach the speed of sound. Models suggest a mature hypercane could achieve wind speeds as fast as 970 kilometers, or 600 miles per hour. That is more than double the wind speed of the most violent F5 tornado ever recorded. Such winds would not just flatten cities, they would scour the very bedrock clean, stripping away soil, rock, and any living thing in their path. There is no shelter from this. Then you realize the true scale of the approaching horror. A normal hurricane is a few hundred miles across. A hypercane could be absolutely massive, with the largest systems growing to the size of the continental United States. You cannot escape this storm. For the next several weeks, your entire world is the storm. Even more bizarre and deadly than the winds is the hypercane's core. The central pressure would be ridiculously low, far lower than any storm ever measured. This is what gives the storm its immense longevity, but it also creates a truly alien environment at its heart. One of the strangest scholarly predictions is that these storms were so intense they literally damaged the planet's already fragile ozone layer as they raged. If you were somehow able to stand in the eye, ignoring the winds that would have already ripped you to shreds, the air pressure would be so low you'd effectively be standing at an altitude of a stratospheric jet. You wouldn't be able to breathe, and you'd immediately suffer from severe altitude sickness as the nitrogen in your blood began to bubble out. The hypercane doesn't just kill you with wind and water, it kills you with physics, creating a column of unlivable, high-altitude conditions right down at sea level. This is the weather of a broken planet, a world where the elements themselves have become monsters. At this point, you may be confused about how anything could have possibly survived these times. And for the most part, you'd be right. Many vast stretches of Pangea were near or entirely void of any meaningful life. The world was not entirely empty, but it was profoundly, unnervingly simple. The handful of survivors that dot this landscape are what paleontologists call disaster taxa, hardy, opportunistic generalists who thrive in the aftermath of devastation, like weeds colonizing a burnt field. They are the squatters in a ruined kingdom. What is most striking about this new ecology is not what's here, but what's missing. Gone are the complex, vibrant food webs of the Permian period, with their dozens of specialized herbivores and varied tiers of predators. The entire ecological structure has collapsed into a flat, monotonous state. This is a world almost entirely without complexity. It is a ghost of an ecosystem, haunted by the memory of a richer past. You experience this profound emptiness with your ears. As you stand in a sparse woodland near one of the poles, the overwhelming sound is the wind whistling through the hardy, needle-leafed trees. There is no complex chorus of insect buzzing, no symphony of bird-like calls from a diverse fauna. The planet has fallen silent. It's a deep, post-apocalyptic stillness that speaks to the sheer scale of the loss. In this resource-starved world, a new rule seems to apply to the survivors. Get small or die. This is a well-documented historical fact in the fossil record known as the Lilliput effect, a phenomenon where animal species that make it through a mass extinction are often significantly smaller than their pre-extinction relatives. With food scarce and the environment hostile, a smaller body is a huge advantage. It requires fewer calories, matures faster, and can reproduce more quickly, all essential traits for survival in a brutal world. We see this trend demonstrated in many of the survivors, including the apex predator of the time, Moschorhinus. The individuals from this period suffered from somewhat stunted growth, typically being about 13% smaller than their pre-extinction ancestors, an effect the video aptly describes as insular dwarfism, except on a global scale. Yet truthfully, not all of Pangea was this extreme a death zone. Life clung on in refuges. The more northern and southern latitudes, far from the unbearable heat of the equator, provided a sanctuary for both animals and plants. Here the climate was a mix of biomes that were warm, but not burn your face off hot, grading into more temperate conditions closer to the poles. Even these polar regions were far from frozen. During this whole epoch, the planet was too hot for permanent ice sheets to form, even at the poles themselves. It was in these more habitable fringes of the world, away from the sterile super deserts and Hypercane battered coasts, that the first act of the Triassic drama would unfold, starring a cast of the unlikeliest champions imaginable. If I could somehow drop you into one of these more sane, temperate refuges, I can almost guarantee what animal you would see first. It was the undisputed heavyweight champion of this post-apocalyptic world, the king of Pangea, by an absolutely massive margin. Its name was Lystrosaurus. Now, when you finally get a good look at this creature, you might be left feeling a bit underwhelmed, perhaps even confused as to how a thing like this becomes a global monarch. It is certainly not a dinosaur, nor is it a true reptile. It's a dicynodont, a member of the broader group of animals called therapsids, the so-called mammal-like reptiles from which our own distant ancestors arose. Visually, Lystrosaurus is a triumph of humble, unassuming design. Picture a creature about the size of a pig, or a stocky, medium-sized dog. It has a chunky, barrel-chested body, 4 stubby legs splayed out to the sides, and a short, unimpressive tail. Its face is short and blunt, ending not in a mouth full of fearsome teeth, but in a horny, turtle-like beak. In fact, its only teeth are 2 prominent tusks growing down from its upper jaw, giving it a vaguely walrus-like appearance. It wasn't built for speed, it wasn't armored, and it certainly wasn't a voracious killing machine. It looks less like a conqueror and more like a walking victim, a creature seemingly designed to be prey. Yet this unassuming herbivore didn't just survive the Great Dying, it thrived in its aftermath in a way that no other animal has, before or since. The shock of its dominance is best understood through the fossil record, which tells a truly astonishing story. The scientific evidence from the fossil-rich Karoo Basin in South Africa is particularly stark. In the rock layers immediately preceding the extinction, Lystrosaurus fossils are present, but they make up a tiny fraction of a rich and diverse ecosystem. Then you cross the extinction boundary line. In the earliest Triassic layers just above it, the diversity collapses, and the fossils of Lystrosaurus suddenly explode in abundance, accounting for up to 95% of every single terrestrial vertebrate fossil found. Let that number sink in. Imagine taking a walk through the wilderness today, and 95 out of every 100 animals you see, from squirrels to deer to bears, are all the same species. It's a biological monoculture on a continental scale. For a time traveler, the experience would be profoundly monotonous and surreal. You could walk for days across the plains of early Triassic South Africa and see nothing but endless herds of these same pig-sized, tusked animals grazing on the tough, weedy ferns. The king of this wasteland wasn't a fearsome tyrant. It was a humble, pug-faced creature that won by default. This staggering success has, for over a century, locked paleontologists in a fierce debate. Was Lystrosaurus's success a case of incredible evolutionary skill, a creature perfectly pre-adapted for the apocalypse? Or did it simply get lucky? A case of winning a lottery that nobody else wanted to enter? The truth, as we'll see, is likely a bit of both. So, was it skill, or was it just dumb luck? The evidence strongly suggests that while luck certainly played a role, Lystrosaurus had a formidable survival toolkit that made it uniquely suited for this ruined world. The first and perhaps most important tool in that kit was its profound ability to dig. This wasn't a casual digger. Its entire body was a marvel of fossorial engineering. When paleontologists examine its skeleton, the signs are unmistakable. Its forelimbs are disproportionately powerful, even more robust and chiseled than its hind limbs. These weren't legs built for running, but for shoveling. They were anchored to a thick, heavily reinforced shoulder girdle, providing the stability needed for powerful, earth-moving strokes. Even its two signature tusks, which might seem ornamental, likely played a crucial role. A prominent idea suggests they operated like biological pickaxes, perfect for breaking up the hard-baked Triassic soil and dislodging tough roots, clearing the way for its powerful claws to do the real work. Put simply, Lystrosaurus wasn't just an animal that lived on the land, it was an animal that lived in the land. This skill was nothing less than a cheat code for surviving the apocalypse. By retreating into subterranean burrows, Lystrosaurus could simply bypass the worst of the planet's surface horrors. First and foremost, it could escape the lethal heat. While the surface temperature soared to a deadly 60 degrees Celsius, just a few feet underground, the Earth would have maintained a stable and survivable temperature, a cool and humid oasis shielded from the planetary oven. This thermal regulation was the difference between life and a sun-baked death. But the advantages didn't stop there. The burrows also provided a private, more hospitable atmosphere. While the surface air was a thin, toxic soup with dangerously low oxygen levels, the enclosed environment of a burrow would have offered some relief. It would have maintained higher humidity, preventing dehydration, and would have been a refuge from the worst of the acrid, sulfurous smog that likely hugged the ground. It was a personal bunker against a chemical assault. Finally, the simple act of having a roof of dirt over its head provided total protection from the third great killer, the sun itself. With the ozone layer shredded, the surface was being bombarded by intense, DNA-scrambling ultraviolet radiation. By spending the hottest parts of the day underground, Lystrosaurus was completely shielded from this invisible threat. heat stroke, suffocation, and radiation burns, the three horsemen of the Induan apocalypse, were all nullified by the simple act of digging a hole. This is not just a paleontological guess. It's a mainstream survival strategy we see across the globe today. Countless modern animals, from fennec foxes in the Sahara to gopher tortoises in Florida, use burrowing as their primary defense against extreme heat and predation. Lystrosaurus had mastered this ancient and proven strategy, not just as a defense, but as a way of life. It wasn't just lucky. It was a pre-built apocalypse prepper, ready to wait out the storm in its subterranean shelter. Digging a burrow was an ingenious defense, but it was only half the battle. Lystrosaurus still had to emerge into the thin, poisonous air to find food and water. And this is where we find the second piece of its incredible survival kit, a respiratory system that was, for its time, a high-performance marvel. While other animals were gasping and suffocating in the 12% oxygen atmosphere, Lystrosaurus was breathing with relative ease. Its anatomy tells the story. The first clue is its distinctly barrel-shaped chest. This wasn't just a sign of being chubby. It was a massively expanded thoracic cavity, capable of housing a pair of enormous, powerful lungs. It was built to maximize every single breath. Going along with this, it had short, direct internal nostrils that allowed for rapid and efficient air intake, a biological supercharger gulping in the thin air. And finally, if you look at its vertebrae, you'll see high neural spines, bony projections rising from the top. These weren't for armor, they were the crucial anchor points for a set of incredibly powerful breathing muscles. These muscles would have worked like bellows, contracting and expanding its massive chest cavity with formidable force, transforming it into what the video aptly calls a pure oxygen gobbler. In a world where the most precious resource was oxygen itself, Lystrosaurus was a master extractor. It had the biological equivalent of the best life support system on the market, an advantage that cannot be overstated. But even this phenomenal breathing apparatus might not have been enough to deal with the most extreme environmental swings. What happened when a nearby volcanic fissure reawakened, spewing a fresh cloud of dust and gas that blotted out the sun for months? What happened during the peak of the lethal summer heat, when even a short trip from the burrow was a death sentence? For this, Lystrosaurus seems to have had one more truly remarkable trick. While its breathing adaptations are well supported, another fascinating hypothesis suggests it could simply sleep through the worst of the catastrophe. This theory revolves around the ability to enter a state of prolonged torpor, a deep metabolic shutdown very similar to hibernation. It's a way of pulling down the biological shutters and just waiting for the storm to pass. The evidence for this is both brilliant and wonderfully quirky. It comes from the tusks of a Lystrosaurus specimen found in, of all places, Antarctica. Much like the rings of a tree, its tusks grew continuously throughout its life, laying down layers of dentin that recorded its metabolic state. When paleontologists sliced a tusk open and examined these layers, they saw a clear pattern. There were thick bands of healthy, rapid growth, indicating periods when the animal was thriving. But these were interspersed with thin, dense stress marks, showing periods where growth had all but stopped completely. This is the telltale signature of an animal that was regularly shutting down its entire system to endure extreme environmental stress. This ability to effectively nap on command would have been a game changer. It allowed Lystrosaurus to survive the impact winters caused by volcanic dust, the months-long periods of darkness and cold where plants would have died back. It could have slept through the most brutal summer heat waves, or periods of intense drought when its food sources withered away. While other animals starved or cooked, Lystrosaurus was safely tucked away in its burrow, its metabolism slowed to a crawl, conserving energy and simply waiting for better days. It survived by essentially napping its way through the apocalypse, a skill that is, quite frankly, deeply enviable. Let's follow one of these creatures through a single, grueling day. Your day as a Lystrosaurus begins not with the sun, but with the cool, damp smell of the earth. You awaken in the absolute darkness of your burrow, the air still and humid around you. Pushing aside the dirt plug at the entrance, you emerge into the oppressive twilight of an early Triassic dawn. The air that hits your face is a shock, thin, acrid, and already growing warm, even as the washed-out sun struggles to climb a hazy, brownish sky. You take a few deep, powerful breaths, your massive lungs working efficiently to extract what little oxygen the world has to offer, a process so innate you don't even notice it. The landscape before you is a study in desolation. A vast, reddish plain stretches to the horizon, dotted with sparse clumps of tough, low-lying greenery. There are no grand forests, no lush meadows. It is a world painted in a monochrome palette of red earth and muted olive-green plants. Driven by a gnawing hunger, you begin to forage. You move with a lumbering, steady gait, your stubby legs carrying your barrel-chested body across the plain. You are not built for speed, but for endurance. Your primary food source is the hardy flora that managed to survive the apocalypse. Plants like the dicroidium, a type of seed fern. You use your powerful turtle-like beak to snip off the tough fronds, your strong jaw muscles making quick work of the fibrous vegetation. For a modern herbivore, this would be a poor meal, but for you, it is sustenance. As you methodically graze, a profound sense of loneliness pervades the landscape. You see no other kinds of herbivores. There are no herds of different species sharing the plains, no small browsers darting through the undergrowth. The world belongs to your kind. As the morning wears on, the sun climbs higher, its heat intensifying from a gentle warmth to a punishing physical blow. The baked earth radiates heat from below, and the air begins to shimmer. Now, your tusks become crucial tools. Lowering your head, you drive them into the hard-packed soil, breaking it apart with a few powerful thrusts. Then your chiseled forelimbs take over, scooping away the loosened dirt with practiced efficiency. Within moments, you've unearthed a cluster of starchy, nutrient-rich roots and tubers. This is a vital part of your diet, a hidden larder that sustains you when the surface plants wither in the heat. By midday, the world has become an oven. The temperature climbs towards its lethal peak, and the air is thick with a heat that feels solid. To remain on the surface now would be suicide. This is when your burrow transforms from a home into a life support system. You retreat into the cool, dark earth, the oppressive heat and scorching UV radiation instantly forgotten. Here, in the stable, humid darkness, you will wait out the worst of the day. You doze, you rest, you conserve every precious calorie, your super-efficient lungs making the most of the still, hypoxic air. As the sun finally begins to dip towards the horizon, the inferno outside relents just enough for you to emerge once more. Thirst is now your primary drive. You trudge towards a shallow, muddy waterhole, the water stagnant and murky. As you lower your head to drink, a flicker of movement catches your eye. On the far bank, partially submerged, lies a long, slender shape with a hooked snout. It's a proterosuchid, one of the new reptiles, watching you with cold reptilian stillness. It is your main, and perhaps only, predator. You are cautious, but not panicked. The predator knows that tackling a healthy adult like you is a risky proposition. After quenching your thirst, you move on, leaving the hunter to its patient vigil. The true defense against this threat is not your strength or your tusks, but your sheer, overwhelming numbers. A short time later, you find what you were seeking. The rest of your herd, dozens of your kind grazing together in the fading light. There is safety here. You settle in amongst them. Another day in the harshest world imaginable. Survived. Possessing a survival toolkit that was practically custom designed for the apocalypse, Lystrosaurus found itself in a world that was, for all intents and purposes, its personal inheritance. It was a winner by default. The devastating crucible of the Great Dying had scoured the planet of almost all its competition. The vast and varied herds of other Permian herbivores were gone. The specialized predators that had hunted them were also gone, or were so rare as to be ecologically irrelevant. This created a profound ecological vacuum, a void on a continental scale. And in the world of biology, a vacuum never stays empty for long. With no rivals to contend with for food, and virtually no predators capable of making a significant dent in its population, Lystrosaurus did what life does when given a world of opportunity. It exploded. Its numbers multiplied at an exponential rate, allowing it to rapidly colonize the wounded planet. This wasn't just a local success story. It was a global conquest. Its reign was absolute, and its kingdom was the entire habitable world. Fossils of this one unassuming genus have been found in South Africa, deep in central Russia, across India, and even in Antarctica. Remember, in the time of Pangea, these land masses were all welded together, allowing this ultimate survivor to undertake a planetary migration. It became one of the first truly cosmopolitan terrestrial vertebrates, a testament to its incredible hardiness and generalist lifestyle. Most animals are restricted to specific climates or habitats, but Lystrosaurus was different. It didn't need a specific type of forest or a particular climate. It just needed ground it could dig into and tough plants it could chew. It was the ultimate planetary weed, thriving in the rubble of a fallen world. Its overwhelming dominance raises an interesting question. Was Lystrosaurus just a passive passenger in this empty world? Or did its sheer numbers actively shape the planet's slow recovery? Some paleontologists now speculate that it may have been an accidental ecosystem engineer, fundamentally altering the environment around it. Think of its most crucial adaptation: burrowing. Now imagine not one, but hundreds of millions of these creatures constantly digging, churning, and aerating the hard-baked Triassic soil. This process, known as bioturbation, would have had a massive impact. It would have helped break down the compacted, nutrient-poor Earth, allowing water to penetrate more deeply. Their waste, buried within these burrows, would have acted as a vital fertilizer, reintroducing organic nutrients into a starved system. In a way, these creatures may have been tilling the soil of a dead planet, helping to restart the crucial nutrient cycles that are the foundation of any healthy ecosystem. Furthermore, their constant grazing on the tough, weedy ferns may have created what ecologists call a grazing lawn, preventing any single disaster-proof plant from completely dominating the landscape and helping to maintain a baseline of floral diversity. Yet, for all its success, the dynasty of Lystrosaurus was destined to be a short one, geologically speaking. Its entire suite of adaptations was tailored for survival in a disaster. It was a master of the broken world, but a poor competitor in a recovering one. As the millions of years crept by, the planet slowly began to heal. The climate stabilized, the oceans became more oxygenated, and new, more specialized forms of life began to evolve to fill the slowly reopening ecological niches. Faster, more agile herbivores appeared, better adapted to evade the new predators that were also emerging. Plants evolved new defenses, and herbivores in turn evolved more efficient ways to eat them. In this new, more complex world, the ultimate generalist was at a disadvantage. It was outcompeted on all fronts. Sometime in the Middle Triassic, the last Lystrosaurus took its final breath, its kind fading into geological memory. It was the undisputed king of the apocalypse, an opportunist that inherited the earth, but its kingdom was built on ruins, and it crumbled the moment the world began to build anew. While the humble Lystrosaurus inherited the earth, it did not do so entirely unopposed. In the shadows of this broken world, a ghost from the old order still stalked the land. This was the last of the great Permian predators, a creature that had survived the apocalypse only to find itself a king with a ruined kingdom. Its name was Moschorhinus. If Lystrosaurus was the symbol of the new world, Moschorhinus was the tragic, fading emblem of the old one. It was a therocephalian, another group of synapsids closely related to our own lineage, but this branch of the family tree had specialized in the art of the kill. In the final days of the Permian, it's a mainstream paleontological fact that predators like Moschorhinus were on the rise, actively replacing the fearsome, saber-toothed gorgonopsids as the planet's top carnivores. They were poised for total domination. And then the world ended. Visually, Moschorhinus was a startling example of convergent evolution, in some ways looking like the lion of its time. Yet this was no feline, nor even a mammal. It had a powerful, stocky build, with a broad, heavily reinforced skull designed to withstand immense stress. Its jaws were a powerhouse of bone and muscle, but its most terrifying features were its teeth. Housed within those jaws were a set of enormous, saber-like canines, comparable in length to those of its gorgonopsid predecessors. These were not delicate, slashing weapons. They were thick, strong, and deeply rooted, perfect for piercing the tough hide of its prey and holding on with an iron-like grip. A quirky tidbit that belies its ferocity is its name, which translates from Greek to calf snout, a comically mundane label for what was the most dangerous animal on the planet. But the great dying had pulled the rug out from underneath it. In the new Induan world, Moschorhinus found itself in a profoundly precarious position. Its traditional prey, the diverse, large herbivores of the late Permian, were gone. The smorgasbord was closed, and only one item was left on the menu: the tough, tusked, and overwhelmingly numerous Lystrosaurus. This forced a deadly new dynamic. And to make matters worse, the predator itself was diminished. The fossil record provides clear scientific evidence for the Lilliput effect acting on this animal. The surviving Moschorhinus were, on average, 13% smaller than their Permian ancestors. A stunted generation raised in a world of scarcity. This created a high-stakes drama that played out daily across the Pangean plains. A smaller, weakened predator was now forced to hunt one of the hardiest and most robust herbivores on the planet. Attacking an adult Lystrosaurus with its powerful beak, defensive tusks, and stocky build would have been an incredibly dangerous proposition for a lone Moschorhinus. Paleontologists still debate the exact hunting style of this animal. Was it a stealthy ambush predator like a tiger, using its sabers for a quick, precise kill? Or did it rely on its powerful build for a more direct, crushing attack, wrestling its prey into submission? Whatever the method, it was a predator living on a knife's edge, the last of the old guard, fighting for survival in a world that no longer belonged to it. As the last of the old synapsid kings, the Moschorhinus fought its losing battle against obsolescence. Another branch of its family was playing a completely different game. These were not rulers, and they were certainly not apex predators. They were the survivors in the shadows, the quiet opportunists living in the margins of the Lystrosaurus empire. They were the Cynodonts, the dog jaws, and they are a profoundly important group because they were not just another strange Triassic creature. They were our own deepest, most distant kin. Every mammal on Earth today, from the blue whale to the shrew, from your golden retriever to you yourself, can trace its ancestry back to these humble, unassuming survivors of the great dying. In the chaos of the Induan, the Cynodonts were not dominant. They were small, secretive creatures, most no larger than a house cat. You would most likely encounter one at night, a fleeting glimpse of a small, low-slung body scurrying through the undergrowth. They lived in the cracks of the New World, avoiding the larger predators and the vast, lumbering herds of Lystrosaurus. They were the underdogs, seemingly destined for a bit part in the grand Triassic drama. But they held a secret weapon, an evolutionary innovation so profound it would eventually allow their descendants to conquer the world. That weapon was in their mouths. Take a look inside the jaws of almost any reptile from this time, and you'll see rows of simple, peg-like conical teeth, all more or less the same. They're good for one thing: gripping and swallowing. But peer inside the mouth of a cynodont, and you see the future. The scientific evidence is clear in their fossilized skulls. Their teeth were highly differentiated, a specialized toolkit for processing food with incredible efficiency. At the front, they had small, sharp incisors for nipping and cutting. Flanking those were pronounced canines for piercing and gripping prey. But the real revolution was in the back of the jaw. Here they possessed complex post-canines, the ancestors of our own molars and premolars, with multiple cusps designed for shearing, crushing, and grinding. In a world defined by scarcity, this was a superpower. While other animals could only gulp down their food, a cynodont could chew. It could slice through tough insect exoskeletons, crush the bones of small vertebrates, and grind fibrous plant matter, extracting every last possible calorie. This dental efficiency opened up a whole new menu of food sources that were unavailable to their competitors. It was one of the first crucial steps on the road to becoming a mammal, and it was the key to their survival in a world where every meal was a hard-won victory. The poster child for this successful strategy is a genus called Thrinaxodon. Picture a creature about the size of a cat, with a long body, short legs, and a skull that looks like a blend between a reptile and a dog. Scholars still fiercely debate whether these animals had a full coat of fur, as it doesn't fossilize, but their increasingly mammal-like biology makes it a strong possibility. Thrinaxodon was likely an active hunter of insects, grubs, and any tiny vertebrate it could overpower. And just like its contemporary, the mighty Lystrosaurus, it survived the harshest conditions by going underground. It was an expert burrower, and we have incredible fossilized evidence of this. One of the most remarkable paleontological tidbits is the discovery of a fossilized Thrinaxodon burrow in the Karoo Basin. with the animal itself curled up inside. Even more strangely, it appeared to be sharing its burrow with a wounded amphibian, though whether this was a case of cohabitation or just one animal moving into another's den is unknown. These burrows were its refuge, its nursery, and its shield against the hostile world, a blueprint for survival that our own distant ancestors were perfecting. While the reptiles were beginning their dramatic rise, these small, furry-ish creatures were quietly biding their time, honing the adaptations that would, in the fullness of time, lead to us. The stage is now set for one of the most significant power shifts in the history of life on Earth. For tens of millions of years during the Permian, the synapsids, our side of the family tree, the mammal relatives, had been the dominant terrestrial vertebrates. They were the great herbivores, the terrifying apex predators, the rulers of the world. The Great Dying changed everything. It was a cataclysm that fell disproportionately on the synapsids, shattering their dynasties and leaving their few survivors scattered and diminished. This crippling blow opened a window of opportunity, a power vacuum that a rival lineage was perfectly poised to fill. This was the dawn of a new age. This was the rise of the reptiles. More specifically, it was the rise of a group called the Archosauriforms, the ruling reptiles. This is a name you should remember, because this group would go on to produce some of the most spectacular and famous creatures of all time: the dinosaurs, the flying pterosaurs, and the crocodilians. But in the desolate landscape of the Induan, their reign began with a humble and opportunistic vanguard, a family of survivors known as the Proterosuchids. To a time traveler, they would probably be confused for some sort of proto-crocodile. They had a long, slender body, a sprawling gait, and a long snout filled with sharp teeth. But they were not true crocodiles. Their skeletons were far more primitive, and they lacked the armored scoots we see in their modern relatives. Their most defining and easily recognizable trait was the distinctly hooked, down-turned tip of their upper jaw, which overhung the lower jaw like a cruel meat hook. This feature, combined with their recurved, blade-like and serrated teeth, made them perfectly equipped for slicing and dicing flesh. What is truly remarkable about the Proterosuchids is their incredible, almost unbelievable luck. The scientific evidence from the fossil record is clear. They evolved literally right before the start of the Great Dying. Normally, for a brand new lineage, this would be the worst luck of the draw imaginable, like being born on a battlefield during an artillery barrage. But for them, it was like hitting the jackpot. They were evidently just hardy enough, just adaptable enough, to weather the storm of the extinction. And when they emerged on the other side, they found themselves in a world that had been cleared of their rivals. The great synapsid predators were either gone or, like Moschorhinus, were a pale imitation of their former glory. This was the opening the archosaurs needed. They seized the opportunity with evolutionary fervor, exploding in both numbers and diversity, rapidly outpacing the struggling therapsids who had fared far worse in the catastrophe. They were the new blood, the pioneers of a new world order, and they were ready to take over. Paleontologists still debate exactly what ecological advantages allowed these first Archosauriforms to outperform the surviving synapsid predators so decisively. But their rapid success is an undeniable fact written in the rocks. They weren't just survivors. They were the inheritors, the vanguard of the coming age of reptiles. The Proterosuchids didn't just survive, they conquered. Their success was not a quiet, marginal affair like that of our Cynodont ancestors. It was a swift and decisive takeover, a reptilian blitzkrieg that unfolded across the recovering globe. Just like the hardy Lystrosaurus, they became a truly cosmopolitan family, their fossils turning up in the rock layers of a once united Pangea, from the vast plains of what is now Russia and India to the temperate southern regions of South Africa and Argentina. In the places where life could actually gain a foothold, you could expect to find these hook-snouted reptiles. They were the new constants in the predator-prey equation, rapidly becoming the most numerous carnivores on the planet by a huge margin. The synapsid dynasty was over. The reptilian one had begun. But if you were to encounter one, what would you need to avoid? Where would you be safe? This is a question that sparks a lively and ongoing debate among paleontologists. What exactly was their lifestyle? Some scientists look at their relatively long, powerful legs and sprawling posture and argue that they were primarily terrestrial hunters, active predators that would chase down their prey, including Lystrosaurus, on open ground. They envision a world of reptilian pursuit predators, the new wolves of the Triassic plains. However, another camp of researchers points to a different set of clues. Their fossils are very often found in ancient river and floodplain deposits, suggesting a strong link to water. Their anatomy, with nostrils placed high on the snout, seems perfectly suited for lurking just below the surface, much like a modern crocodile. This has led to the hypothesis that they were semi-aquatic ambush predators, hiding in the murky, anoxic waters and lunging out at any unsuspecting animal that came to drink. The likely answer, and a testament to their incredible adaptability, is that they were a bit of both. Different species within the family likely specialized in different niches, occupying a wide range of predatory roles that had been left vacant by the extinction. Some may have been land-based hunters, while others ruled the waterways. This versatility was the key to their domination. No matter the environment, a Proterosuchid was likely there, ready to fill the role of top predator. And there was a definite boss among them. The largest and most formidable member of the family was a genus called Proterosuchus. Measuring over 4 meters, or 13 feet, in length and weighing hundreds of pounds, this was an animal you would not want to meet. To give you a sense of scale, a 13-foot alligator is a truly massive and intimidating creature today. Proterosuchus was its Triassic equivalent. It was likely one of the only predators on the planet that could have regularly and successfully taken down a full-grown adult Lystrosaurus. It was the new apex, the undisputed top of the food chain, and a terrifying sign of things to come. You must understand, the rise of these animals was more than just a footnote in the story of a mass extinction. It was the beginning of an entirely new chapter for life on Earth. From these humble, superficially crocodile-like beginnings, the Archosaur lineage they represented would embark on an incredible evolutionary journey. They were the founding fathers of a dynasty that would rule the planet for the next 180 million years. From their bloodline would spring the mighty dinosaurs that would shake the Jurassic Earth, the majestic pterosaurs that would command the skies, and the resilient crocodilians that still patrol our waters today. The entire age of reptiles, with all its iconic and spectacular creatures, owes its existence to the success of these first hardy survivors who rose from the ashes of the Permian world. Their reign started here. While these dramas of predator and prey, of synapsid and archosaur, played out across the desolate plains, another quieter catastrophe had unfolded. The Great Dying was not just an animal apocalypse. It was a botanical holocaust on a planetary scale. The same forces that suffocated and cooked the fauna had waged a relentless war on the flora. The ceaseless, searing acid rain poisoned the soils and stripped leaves from branches. The scorching heat and intense aridity baked the life from the great forests. The bombardment of UV radiation shredded the delicate cellular machinery of plants, stunting their growth and scorching their tissues. The Permian world, a planet of rich and varied forests, was wiped almost clean, leaving behind a global wasteland. The most profound evidence of this botanical destruction is not a fossil, but an absence. It's a vast, empty chapter in the Earth's geological diary known as the Coal Gap. It is a mainstream, undisputed geological fact that for the first 10 million years of the Triassic period, virtually no new coal deposits were formed anywhere on the planet. To understand the significance of this, you have to remember what coal is. The compressed, fossilized remains of immense amounts of plant matter, primarily from vast, swampy forests. The Permian had been a great age of coal formation, with huge peat-forming forests dominated by plants like the mighty seed fern Glossopteris. The extinction event simply erased them from existence. The world's great swamps died, the peat beds vanished, and the entire planetary engine for burying carbon in the form of coal simply broke down. For 10 million years, the Earth lost its ability to create this fossil fuel, a silent testament to the sheer scale of the botanical devastation. So, what was left? What grew in this forgotten kingdom? It was a world of weeds. The survivors were the botanical equivalents of Lystrosaurus, hardy, opportunistic, and incredibly tough generalists. In the more temperate regions near the poles, where moisture was more reliable, sparse woodlands would have clung to life. These were not the dense, vibrant forests of the Permian, but scraggly, resilient stands of primitive conifers and lycophytes, which are essentially giant club mosses. They were the pioneers, the first to recolonize the scorched earth. Their needle-like leaves and waxy coatings adapted to conserve water in the harsh climate. Beneath these sparse canopies, and stretching across the vast, semi-arid plains, the ground was dominated by a low-lying, tough carpet of other survivors. The most important of these was the dicroidium, another type of seed fern that became the primary food source for the endless herds of Lystrosaurus. Botanists still debate the precise makeup and distribution of these disaster floras across Pangea, but the overall picture is one of profound simplification. The rich botanical diversity of the past was gone, replaced by a monotonous global community of the toughest plants imaginable. This created a world that would have been visually alien to our modern eyes, a world largely without the color green. Imagine not a lush, vibrant landscape, but a world painted in a palette of muted, dusty colors. The baked earth would have been a permanent reddish-brown. The hardy plants, adapted for aridity and constantly coated in a fine layer of dust, would have been a dull, olive, or grayish-green. It was a monochrome world, a silent, dusty garden of weeds stretching to the horizon under a hazy sky. This was the foundation of the new ecosystem, a simple, sparse, and incredibly resilient web of life, built from the toughest survivors on a planet that had done its very best to sterilize itself. The devastation of the world's flora had a direct and catastrophic knock-on effect for the smallest and often most resilient of creatures. It triggered an insect apocalypse. It is a stark and mainstream historical fact that the Great Dying is the only mass extinction event in Earth's entire history to have caused a significant mass die-off of insects. These creatures are the ultimate survivors, having weathered every other planetary catastrophe with relative ease. But the combination of atmospheric poisoning, extreme heat, and the wholesale collapse of the plant ecosystems they depended on for food and shelter proved to be too much. While some hardy generalists undoubtedly survived, the incredible diversity of the Permian insect world, the ancient relatives of dragonflies with huge wingspans, the early beetles, the myriad of plant-eaters, was gone. The intricate world of the small had been shattered. This loss contributes profoundly to the single most unsettling sensory experience of this era, the Great Stillness. As a time traveler, you would be haunted by the silence. Stand in that sparse, dusty forest and listen. The wind sighs through the conifer needles, a low, mournful sound. You might hear the distant rumble of a developing storm or the soft, rhythmic thud of a herd of Lystrosaurus grazing nearby. But that's it. There is no background hum of life. There are no cicadas droning in the oppressive midday heat. There are no crickets chirping their symphonies at dusk. There is no buzz of bees or wasps flitting from flower to flower, because there are no flowers to visit. The air is auditorily empty. This profound silence would be a constant, unnerving companion, a perpetual reminder of the planet's emptiness. It is the sound of a world holding its breath, a soundscape not of peace, but of profound loss. Beneath this silence, another, more elemental process was unfolding. In the rock layers that mark the boundary between the Permian and the Triassic, geologists have found a strange and telling signature, a clue to the fate of the world's dead forests. It's a thin, dark layer that is found in sedimentary rocks all across the globe, and when analyzed, it is shown to be packed with a staggering abundance of fungal spores. This is the fungal spike, and it is a deeply macabre piece of evidence. This quirky planetary scale tidbit is interpreted as the geological tombstone of a biosphere, the fossilized signature of a world rotting away all at once. With trillions of trees and plants killed simultaneously by acid rain and heat, the planet's surface was covered in a layer of dead, decaying wood. This created a sudden, limitless food source for fungi, molds, and other decomposers. They bloomed on a global scale, their spores filling the air and settling in the mud, leaving behind this unmistakable fingerprint of decay. For a time, the dominant form of life on the planet's surface was arguably fungus, feasting on the graveyard of a former world. This all underscores a crucial point about recovery. It's a process that is achingly, almost incomprehensibly slow. It is not enough for a few species to simply survive the initial cataclysm. An ecosystem is not just a collection of animals and plants. It is an infinitely complex network of relationships and interactions that have been built up over millions of years of co-evolution. Pollinators must have plants to pollinate. Herbivores must have specific plants they are adapted to eat. The bacteria in their guts must be able to digest those plants. The entire web of life had been torn apart. The ecological software, the intricate programming of instinct and codependence, had been almost completely erased. Rebuilding that software, reforging those ancient links, re-evolving those complex relationships, that is a process that takes millions upon millions of years. The Induan world was so simple and stark, not just because so much had died, but because the survivors were like amnesiacs, wandering through a ruined library, with no memory of how the books were organized, forced to learn how to read all over again. The fungal spike tells a story of global decay, of a planet feasting on its own dead flesh. But the consequences of losing the world's forests went far deeper than a silent, rotting landscape. The death of the plants triggered another, less discussed catastrophe, one that attacked the very skin of the continents. You are witnessing a world without soil. Healthy soil is not just dirt. It is a living, breathing matrix, a complex community of organic matter, microbes, and minerals, all held together by the intricate, subterranean web of plant roots. With the forests gone, this anchor was lost. The planet's soil was left naked and vulnerable to the relentless assault of the elements. The science of this soil loss is a simple but brutal equation. First came the heat. The same scorching sun that made the surface lethal baked the unprotected topsoil into a hard, cracked crust, killing the microbial life within and destroying its structure. Then came the water. While much of Pangea was a desert, the coastal and temperate regions would have been subject to ferocious, seasonal monsoons or the torrential downpours from the edges of a passing Hypercane. When this water fell, it did not gently soak into a receptive, sponge-like soil. It hammered against the baked, impermeable crust, and with nothing to hold it back, it began to move. Not as gentle streams, but as massive, churning sheet floods, great moving walls of water that scraped the land clean, picking up the loose, dead soil and carrying it away by the billion tons. The planet was bleeding its own fertile skin into the sea. As a time traveler examining the geology of this era, you would see the evidence of this erosion catastrophe written clearly in the rock record. The scientific proof comes from the very nature of the ancient riverbeds preserved from this time. Early Triassic river deposits are overwhelmingly dominated by a specific type called braided river systems. Instead of a single meandering channel like the modern Mississippi, a braided river is a chaotic, wide, and shallow network of constantly shifting channels, all choked with immense amounts of coarse sediment, sand, and gravel. It's a mainstream geological fact that these systems are a hallmark of landscapes with two key features: a lack of stabilizing vegetation and incredibly high rates of erosion. They are the geological signature of a world being actively stripped bare. You would not see tranquil, tree-lined rivers. You would see vast, sterile floodplains of gravel and mud, the arteries of a planet hemorrhaging its own lifeblood. This created a vicious and self-perpetuating cycle that dramatically slowed the planet's recovery. The catastrophic loss of soil made it incredibly difficult for new plants to gain a foothold. A seed that managed to sprout would find itself in a nutrient-poor, unstable substrate, which could be washed away in the very next storm. With fewer plants successfully recolonizing the land, there were fewer roots to begin the long, slow process of rebuilding the soil. This, in turn, led to even more erosion. Scholars still debate the exact time scale of this feedback loop, but it undoubtedly locked the planet in a state of arrested development for millions of years. The land itself was sick. The fever of the great dying had broken, but now the planet was suffering from a profound secondary infection. It had lost its soil, and without that vital living foundation, the slow, arduous process of rebuilding a green and vibrant world was made infinitely harder. The great bleeding of the land had a destination. All of that soil, stripped from the continents by relentless floods, all of that organic matter from the planet's rotting forests, had to go somewhere. It was all being washed, year after year, century after century, into the fresh water arteries of Pangea, the rivers, the swamps, and the lakes. And here, in these choked waterways, it triggered yet another planetary sickness. The freshwater environments of the early Triassic became, in many places, aquatic dead zones. Much like the deep oceans, they turned anoxic, a scientific term for a state of being almost completely devoid of dissolved oxygen. The suffocation that had plagued the atmosphere and the seas had now come for the rivers. The chemistry of this decay was a direct and brutal consequence of the devastation on land. Imagine a pristine, healthy lake. Now imagine dumping the entire decomposing contents of a vast forest into it all at once. That is essentially what was happening on a global scale. This sudden, overwhelming influx of dead plants and eroded soil provided a limitless feast for aerobic bacteria in the water. They bloomed in unimaginable numbers, their populations exploding as they consumed this organic bounty. But their process of decomposition is an oxygen-hungry one. In their frantic planet-scale feast, these microbial blooms consumed virtually every last molecule of dissolved oxygen from the water column, transforming vibrant rivers into stagnant, putrid soups. For most of the life that had survived in these freshwater refuges, this was a death sentence. Any creature that relied on gills to breathe was doomed. The scientific evidence for this is written in the dark, finely laminated shale deposits from this period, which are rich in undecomposed organic matter and pyrite, fool's gold, minerals that can only form in the total absence of oxygen. These rocks tell a story of a world where the water itself could not support aerobic life. You would not have seen shimmering schools of diverse fish darting through the currents. Instead, the water would have been a murky, foul-smelling, and eerily still medium. To a fish, it was the equivalent of a human trying to breathe in a room filled with carbon dioxide. These were not living rivers. They were liquid graveyards. But this world of suffocating water was not entirely without life. In fact, for one ancient and resilient group of animals, this hostile environment wasn't a death trap. It was an opportunity. It was the perfect kingdom for a lineage of creatures who possessed a simple but profound biological trick up their sleeve: the ability to largely ignore the oxygen content of the water by simply raising their heads above the surface and gulping the thin but still breathable air. The death of the rivers was about to pave the way for a monstrous renaissance, an age of amphibians unlike anything the world had seen since the primeval coal swamps of the Carboniferous. The stage was set for their takeover. Into this world of suffocating, stagnant water stepped the new masters of the freshwater realm. But these were not fish, nor were they reptiles. This was the dawn of a second great age of amphibians, a monstrous resurgence led by an ancient and incredibly diverse group of survivors called the Temnospondyls. When you hear the word amphibian, you likely picture a small, slippery frog or a delicate salamander. You must erase that image from your mind. The Temnospondyls were a different class of creature entirely. They were an ancient order of primitive armored tetrapods, many of which were large, heavily built, and ferociously predatory. They were not the gentle pond dwellers of our world. They were the crocodiles and alligators of theirs. So why did they thrive when almost everything else in the water was dying? They possessed a suite of adaptations that made this hostile, anoxic world a perfect kingdom for them. First and most critically, they were air breathers. As amphibians, they possessed simple lungs and could easily break the stagnant surface of the water to gulp down the thin Triassic air. While the fish were suffocating in the oxygen-starved water below, the Temnospondyls were entirely untroubled, treating the water not as a life support system, but simply as a place to hide and hunt. The dead zones were not a threat. They were a competitive advantage, a moat that kept out all their rivals. Second, they had a low-energy lifestyle. Being ectothermic, or cold-blooded, their metabolism was incredibly slow. Unlike the synapsids on land, they didn't need to constantly eat to fuel an internal furnace. They could go for long periods without a meal, a crucial advantage in a low-productivity world. This slow metabolism also meant they required far less oxygen than a more active, warm-blooded animal, making them doubly suited for the thin air and anoxic water. Finally, they were simply tough. It's a mainstream historical fact that the temnospondyle lineage was ancient, having originated way back in the Carboniferous period. They were seasoned veterans of survival, having already weathered several smaller extinction events. They were a proven dynasty of survivors, and the Great Dying, for all its horrors, had simply cleared the board for them to finally take power. Their general appearance was one of primeval brute force. Many of them had massive, flattened skulls that were often more bone than brain, providing both armor and a powerful, solid base for their jaw muscles. Their wide mouths were not filled with the simple, uniform teeth of a reptile, but often a fearsome and varied arsenal. Their bodies were typically long and low-slung, covered not in the smooth, permeable skin of a modern frog, but in a tough, scaly hide that offered protection and reduced water loss. Scientists still debate the exact texture and permeability of their skin, but it was likely far more robust and reptile-like than that of their living relatives. This combination of features, the flat head, the armored body, the aquatic lifestyle, made many of them look and behave in a way that was superficially very similar to a modern crocodile, lurking patiently in the murky shallows, the undisputed and monstrous new kings of a dead and silent river. If you were forced to wade into one of these murky, oxygen-starved rivers, your experience would be one of endless, horrifying variety. The temnospondyls were not a monolithic group of identical crocodile impersonators. They were a diverse and ancient order, and in the wake of the Great Dying, they had radiated into a menagerie of monstrous forms, each specialized for a different method of killing. The water around you would have been teeming with this entire rogues gallery, a tour of amphibian horrors. Some of the creatures you'd encounter were the specialists, the expert anglers of this new world. These were the long-snouted piscivores, temnospondyls that had convergently evolved a body plan similar to a modern gharial. They possessed narrow, slender skulls and jaws lined with a fence of sharp, conical, needle-like teeth. They were perfectly designed for one task: snatching the few surviving slippery fish from the murky water with a sudden sideways snap of the head. An encounter with one of these might be less a direct threat to you and more a startling, lightning-fast splash in the water nearby as it hunted its smaller prey. But for every delicate fish-eater, there was a brute. Others wore robust, widened skulls, massive U-shaped anvils of bone that were fitted with a completely different kind of dentition. Instead of needles, their jaws were fitted with stout, reinforced teeth, sometimes with blunted, crushing surfaces. These were the generalists and the shellcrackers, powerful amphibians capable of dispatching a wider range of prey. They could have easily crushed the shells of the few surviving freshwater mollusks, or delivered a devastating, bone-shattering bite to any small land animal, like one of our Cynodont ancestors, that was foolish enough to venture too close to the water's edge. An attack from one of these would not be a quick snap, but a powerful, vice-like grip, dragging you under the stagnant surface. And then there was the sheer, terrifying range of sizes. The water around your ankles might hide the smaller ambush predators. Temnospondylus no bigger than your hand, perfectly camouflaged against the muddy riverbed, waiting to lunge at insects or tiny fish. But as you waded deeper into the chest-high water of the main channel, you would be entering the territory of the giants. In these dark waters lurked creatures that were routinely longer than you were tall, massive beasts over 2 meters in length, with heads the size of serving platters. These were the true apex predators of the freshwater realm, the undisputed kings of their anoxic kingdoms. Let's paint the picture. You step into the river. The water is warm, still, and the color of mud. A foul organic smell hangs in the air. You can't see your own feet. Every ripple, every submerged log sends a jolt of adrenaline through you. You take another step, and something thick and scaly brushes against your leg. You flinch back, but it's gone. Was it just a branch? Then you see it. 2 small bumps break the surface 10 feet away, perfectly still. 2 reptilian-looking eyes, watching you. Before you can react, the water between you erupts. It's not a lunging crocodile. It's a massive, flat head, a yard wide, surging upwards from the depths, its cavernous mouth gaping open, lined with a palisade of teeth. This was the constant, horrifying experience of the freshwater world. Paleontologists still debate how active these giant amphibians truly were. Were they sluggish, lethargic bottom dwellers like some modern giant salamanders, capable only of these short, explosive bursts of energy? Or were they more active predators, capable of sustained pursuit in the water, true river monsters in every sense? For you, in that terrifying moment, the academic distinction would be entirely irrelevant. This amphibian takeover was not a subtle, background phenomenon. In certain parts of the world, it was an overwhelming, almost absolute conquest. To truly appreciate the scale of their domination, we must travel to the far southeastern corner of Pangea, to a region that would one day drift off to become the continent we know as Australia. Even 250 million years ago, it seems, this was a land destined for strange and formidable wildlife. Here, paleontologists have unearthed a window into this lost world, a fossil site known as the Arcadia Formation. And the story it tells is one of a continent completely overrun. The Arcadia environment was a vast, well-watered floodplain, crisscrossed by a network of sluggish, anoxic rivers and swamps, the perfect habitat for temnospondylus. And the fossil evidence reveals that they took to this environment with an enthusiasm that is frankly disturbing. When scientists tally up the vertebrate fossils unearthed from this formation, the numbers are staggering and profoundly unbalanced. The scientific evidence is unequivocal. A full 90% of every single animal fossil found belongs to a temnospondyl amphibian. The remaining meager 10% is a scattered mix of a few hardy lungfish, some ray-finned fish, and the occasional fossil of a land-dwelling reptile, like a proterosuchid, that was unlucky enough to fall into the water. Let that sink in. This was an ecosystem where 9 out of every 10 animals was a carnivorous amphibian. Imagine paddling a canoe down a river today where 9 out of every 10 creatures you see, from the fish in the water to the birds in the sky to the mammals on the bank, is some form of crocodile. It's an ecosystem that is fundamentally broken, a predator-heavy food web so unbalanced it defies modern ecological rules. This was the reality of the Arcadia environment. It was a place where the water was thick with these lurking, flat-headed predators, all competing in a monstrously crowded, amphibian-eat amphibian world. It was less a healthy river system, and more a planetary-scale frog pond from hell, a creepy, crawly kingdom of monstrous amphibians. And their kingdom was not confined to these inland swamps. They had another remarkable trick that allowed for their global success. Unlike virtually every single one of their thousands of modern descendants, many of these ancient temnospondyls had broken a fundamental amphibian rule. They were not afraid of salt. A quirky but fascinating tidbit is the discovery of temnospondyl fossils in what are clearly marine and coastal deposits, evidence that many species were perfectly tolerant of salt water. While there is just one lone species of frog today that can endure the sting of the sea, back then it seems to have been a common trait. This opened up entire new worlds for them. They could leave the crowded, anoxic rivers and venture out into the coastal estuaries, the mangrove-like swamps, and even the shallow waters of the sea itself. This incredible tolerance for salt made them even more successful, a truly global dynasty of aquatic predators, as comfortable in a river in the heart of Pangea as they were in the warm, shallow seas off its coast. It was another crucial tool in their survival kit, allowing them to become the undisputed rulers of nearly every body of water on a wounded planet. Their dominion over the coastlines is a perfect gateway into the final and largest realm of this post-apocalyptic world, the great global ocean. As you stand on a desolate Pangean beach, the geography of the sea is as alien as the land. There is no Atlantic, no Indian, no familiar collection of seas. There are only two main players. Before you lies the super-ocean, Panthalassa, a body of water so vast it dwarfs even our modern Pacific, stretching across more than half the globe in an endless expanse of water. And to the east, nestled in the great C-shaped bight of Pangea's coast, lies the Paleotethys Sea, a smaller, shallower, and more enclosed body of water that acted as a great incubator for the strange marine life of this era. But as you dip your hand into the water, you'd realize this is no paradise. The oceans, too, were still profoundly sick. The first sensation is the heat. The water is not cool or refreshing. It's a listless, unnervingly warm bath. The same runaway greenhouse effect that baked the land had heated the ocean's surface to hot tub temperatures. But beneath this simmering surface lay a more insidious problem. Just like the rivers, vast swathes of the ocean, especially the deeper waters, were still anoxic, starved of oxygen. And the immense amount of carbon dioxide still lingering in the atmosphere was being absorbed by the sea, turning the water acidic. This acidification was a chemical catastrophe for any organism that built its body from calcium carbonate. Corals, clams, sea urchins, ammonites, and the vast clouds of plankton that form the base of the marine food web. Their intricate shells and skeletons were literally dissolving in this corrosive, carbonated sea. Marine geologists still debate the exact chemistry and extent of the ocean's acidity, but its devastating effects on shelled life are an undeniable chapter in the geological record. If you were to take a dive into this alien ocean, the most striking sight would be the reefs. But they would not be the vibrant, complex, kaleidoscopic cities of coral we know today. It's a mainstream paleontological fact that the Great Dying was the most severe crisis in the entire 3 billion-year history of reef ecosystems. The dominant reef-building corals of the Permian were wiped out completely, creating a reef gap that would last for millions of years. In their place, something far more ancient and primitive had taken over. The new reefs of this world were not built by animals, but by microbes. As you swim closer, you see them. strange, lumpy, layered structures of rock, like giant, stony cabbages growing on the seafloor. These are stromatolites, microbial reefs built layer by agonizingly slow layer by vast colonies of bacteria and algae. The scientific evidence for this is clear in the fossil record, where the diverse skeletons of Permian reefs are abruptly replaced by thick layers of simple, microbial limestone. This wasn't just a change in architecture, it was a regression, a great leap backwards in time. These microbial reefs were a throwback to the most ancient days of life on Earth, to the Precambrian, over 1 billion years earlier, when microbes were the only architects on the planet. The oceans, in their sickness, had reverted to a primitive embryonic state. You are not swimming in the Triassic Ocean. You are swimming in a ghostly echo of the dawn of life itself. As you float in this warm, primeval sea, surrounded by the silent, stony monuments of the microbial reefs, you notice something else, profoundly wrong. The water itself is not the familiar blue or green of a healthy ocean. The light filtering down from the hazy sun is being warped and tinted into a palette of sickly alien colors. In the shallower waters, the sea is a murky olive green, while deeper down, the shadows coalesce into a strange purplish-brown hue. You are swimming through a toxic soup, and the water's bizarre color is the sign of the poison that fills it. The source of this discoloration is a planetary-scale bloom of some of the most ancient and bizarre forms of life on our planet, green and purple sulfur bacteria. The scientific evidence for their ghostly presence is not found in traditional fossils, but in geochemical biomarkers, the unique, durable fat molecules that these microbes produce, which get trapped in the seafloor mud and fossilize along with the rock. When geologists drill into early Triassic marine shales and analyze their chemistry, they find these molecular fossils in abundance, the unmistakable chemical fingerprints of a purple and green ocean. These are not your everyday bacteria. They are anoxygenic phototrophs, meaning they perform a type of photosynthesis that does not produce oxygen. Instead of using water, they use the toxic hydrogen sulfide gas, that same rotten egg-smelling poison that had suffocated the land, as their fuel. They thrive in a very specific and very lethal set of conditions. Water that has no oxygen, but is still shallow enough to be penetrated by sunlight and is saturated with hydrogen sulfide bubbling up from the anoxic depths. The early Triassic coastal oceans, particularly in the enclosed Paleo-Tethys Sea, had become the perfect planet-sized petri dish for these strange microbes. The green sulfur bacteria would have dominated the upper layers of the water, while the purple sulfur bacteria, which can tolerate lower light levels, would have formed a deeper, shadowy layer beneath them. This brings us back to your sensory journey. The experience of swimming here would be one of profound multisensory alienation. The water is uncomfortably warm, and it carries the faint but persistent cloying smell of sulfur. The silence is absolute, a deep submarine stillness unbroken by the sounds of fish or crustaceans. And then there is the color. As you swim, you pass through shifting bands of this murky microbial paint, from olive green to a soupy purplish haze. It would feel utterly and completely alien, like swimming not on Earth, but on some distant, dying exoplanet. A quirky tidbit is that these bacteria are not extinct. They still exist today in a few rare and hostile places, like the depths of the Black Sea, or isolated meromictic lakes, where layers of oxygenated and anoxic water never mix. These strange modern environments are our best windows into the state of the Triassic seas. If you were to venture out from the coast, into the vast open waters of the panthalassic superocean, the eerie emptiness would become overwhelming. Here, in the marine equivalent of the great central desert, you could swim for days, for weeks, across a near-endless expanse of warm, strangely colored water, and see nothing. No sharks, no great shoals of fish, no marine reptiles. It was a sterile marine desert, a testament to the fact that the ocean, the very cradle of life, had been pushed to the absolute brink of biological collapse. Life, however, persisted. It clung on in the margins, in the shallower, slightly more oxygenated coastal waters, especially within the relatively protected and boxed-in basin of the Paleotethys. It is here, in this strange, purple-hued coastal realm, that the survivors of the marine apocalypse were fighting their quiet battle for a new beginning. In this strange, purple-hued coastal realm, a quiet but brutal power struggle was underway. The Great Dying had created a profound power vacuum beneath the waves. The titans of the Permian seas were gone. The diverse and often large sharks that had cruised the ancient reefs were decimated. The ammonites, those ubiquitous shelled relatives of squid with their intricate shells, which had been a staple food source for many predators, were all but wiped out. The old oceanic order had been overthrown, leaving the throne of the apex predator tantalizingly empty. And into this void swam a group of survivors that would have their brief, shining moment as the unlikely rulers of the sea. This was not the age of sharks, nor the dawn of the great marine reptiles. For a short time, this was the age of bony fish. The great winners in this marine apocalypse were the ray-finned fish and their close cousins, the coelacanths. These were the lineages that would eventually give rise to almost all the fish we know today, from tuna to trout. They were, it seems, simply more resilient, more adaptable, and less affected by the volcanism and ocean chemistry than their cartilaginous shark rivals. In the wake of the extinction, they exploded in numbers, radiating out to fill the empty niches. The coastal waters would have been home to a variety of these new kings, cosmopolitan genera like the long-jawed, barracuda-like Saurichthys or the deep-bodied Bobosatrania. Marine paleontologists are still trying to piece together the exact food web of these simplified oceans, debating whether these new predators were specialists hunting specific prey or opportunistic generalists that ate anything they could catch. But among this new class of rulers, there was one that was undeniably the king of kings, the largest and most formidable marine predator on the planet. Its name was Birgeria. Imagine a fish with the size, speed, and ferocity of a modern bull shark. But it is not a shark. It is a bony, ray-finned fish, a monstrous, prehistoric version of a predatory trout or pike. With a sleek, torpedo-shaped body, built for speed, and a mouthful of sharp, conical teeth, Birgeria was an evidently voracious hunter. It was a worldwide terror, its fossils found in Triassic marine deposits across the globe, a true disaster taxon that had inherited the global ocean. And we know what it ate. One of the clearest pieces of scientific evidence for its predatory dominance comes from fossilized stomach contents. Preserved within the fossilized rib cages of these mighty fish, paleontologists have found the undigested remains of their last meals, other, smaller fish. Go figure. This confirms it was at the top of the food chain, a swift and powerful hunter that likely preyed on the other surviving fish of the time. For a brief, strange moment in the long history of our planet, the role of apex predator in the sea was not held by a cartilaginous shark, nor by a great, air-breathing marine reptile. It was held by their bony, gill-breathing cousins. The humble fish, for once, was the undisputed tyrant of the sea. It's a mainstream historical fact that power vacuums in the fossil record are often filled by unexpected groups, and the rise of bony fish predators like Birguria is a classic example of this opportunistic principle at work. While the great bony fish Birguria patrolled the open waters as the undisputed king, the oceans were not entirely devoid of their ancient rivals. The sharks were still here, but these were not the great whites or tiger sharks of our modern imagination, nor were they the giant terrors of the later Mesozoic. The sharks that prowled the early Triassic coasts were a different breed altogether, a group of resilient and specialized survivors known as the Hyperdonts. They had been around since the late Devonian, a long-lived and successful lineage, and they had managed to slip through the narrowest of cracks in the door of the Great Dying, surviving where so many of their cousins had perished. If you were to encounter one, your first impression would likely not be one of terror, but of curiosity. Most of the Hyperdonts of this time were relatively small sharks, often just a tad bigger than your foot, living quiet lives on the seafloor. They were not the terrifying apex predators of the open ocean. They were the humble bottom dwellers, the specialists who had found a way to make a living in a ruined world. Their secret to survival was their highly specialized diet, a trait clearly visible in their unique teeth. It's a mainstream historical fact that Hyperdonts possessed what is called heterodont dentition, meaning they had different types of teeth in their jaws for different functions, a trait they shared with our own Cynodont ancestors. At the front of their mouths, they had sharp, pointed teeth for grabbing small, slippery fish. But the back of their jaws was a different story. Here they possessed broad, flattened, molar-like teeth, a biological crushing plate. This dental adaptation is the key to their story. They were expert duraphages, shell crushers. While the bony fish were fighting over the few other fish in the sea, the Hyperdonts were quietly combing the seafloor, using their specialized molars to crack open the tough shells of the few surviving bivalves, crustaceans, and ammonites. This niche specialization was almost certainly what saved them. In a world where their traditional food sources were gone, they adapted, focusing on a tough, hard-to-eat food source that no one else was equipped to handle. But there was one kind that could at least still give you a hell of a fright, and probably a painful, if not lethal, bite. This was the giant of the family, a genus called Acrodus. This was a large Hyperdont for its time, achieving lengths similar to the bony king Birguria, with the largest specimens measuring about 2.5 meters or 8.2 feet. Seeing a shark of this size would certainly be an intimidating experience. But even this giant was not a macro-predator in the modern sense. It too was a duorophagus genus, its mouth filled with those same blunt, broad, shell-crushing teeth. It was a heavyweight bruiser, a specialist in pulverizing armored prey on the seafloor. A quirky tidbit about this particular shark is its apparent versatility. Evidence suggests that, like a modern bull shark, it could also travel from the ocean into freshwater rivers if it pleased. However, you could take some comfort in its limited range. For all its size, Acrodus seems to have been restricted to the waters just around what would one day become the United States. The Hyperdonts were survivors, but they were survivors on the margins, a quiet dynasty of specialists biding their time, while the bony fish reigned supreme. Swimming side by side with the tough, shell-crushing Hyperdonts was another, far more mysterious group of cartilaginous fish. This was the Elasmobranchi, the great lineage that you would recognize, as it includes every single modern shark, from the tiny dwarf lantern shark to the mighty great white. We know they were here. We know they survived the Great Dying. But when it comes to this crucial, early chapter in their modern history, the fossil record is almost completely, maddeningly silent. They are the true ghosts of the Induan oceans. The evidence for their existence is frustratingly ephemeral. The scientific proof we have comes almost entirely from tiny, fragmented fossil teeth, scattered like lonely clues in the marine rock formations of the early Triassic. Each tooth is a definitive confirmation that they were present, a tiny mineralized ghost proclaiming, "I was here." But that is all we have. Because a shark's skeleton is made not of bone, but of cartilage, it very rarely fossilizes. Only under the most perfect and exceptionally rare conditions does the ghost of a full body impression get preserved. And for the elasma branches of the Induan, we have found none. This leaves us with a profound and tantalizing mystery. We know they were prowling these warm, purple-hued waters, but we have almost no idea what they looked like or what they were doing. Without a body, we cannot determine their size. Were they all small and marginal, like the Cynodonts, staying out of the way of the great bony fish Birgeria? Or could there have been a larger, more formidable predator lurking in these waters? A true shark that was an equal to the bony king, whose remains we simply have not been lucky enough to find yet. We cannot know. Without a skeleton, we cannot reconstruct their body shape. Were they sleek, open-water hunters? Or were they flattened, bottom-dwelling ambush predators? The teeth alone cannot tell us the full story. Their entire ecological niche, their role in this strange, recovering ecosystem, is a complete blank. They are a question mark swimming in a sea of ghosts. This profound lack of evidence has led to a great deal of scholarly speculation and debate among paleontologists. Some argue that the scarcity of their fossils suggests they were genuinely rare, a group on the ropes, slowly and quietly recovering in the shadows. Others maintain that the lack of evidence is not evidence of absence, and that a more diverse shark fauna may have existed that simply left no trace behind. They were there, but they were phantoms, leaving behind nothing but the enigmatic smiles of their fossilized teeth. And so, while we can confidently describe the world of the bony fish and the Hypercane, the true ancestors of our modern sharks remain in the shadows, a silent, unseen presence in this alien ocean, their secrets still locked away in the ancient rock, waiting for a discovery that may never come. But the true mystery of the Induan waters doesn't concern the ghostly ancestors of modern sharks, but rather a legendary and profoundly weird family of fish from the Permian, a group that was long thought to be the poster child for extinction itself. This was the Eugeneodontidae, a poorly understood but visually spectacular order of extinct, cartilaginous fish. They are not true sharks, but holocephalians, making them distant relatives of modern-day chimeras, or ratfish. But they were a far cry from their humble deep-sea cousins. They were a lineage defined by biological experimentation, possessing some of the most iconic and bizarre jaws of all time. When you think of this group, you likely picture their most famous member, the mighty Helicoprion, the so-called Buzzsaw shark. Its lower jaw was a terrifying, spiraling whirl of teeth that looked for all the world like a circular saw blade embedded in its face. Or perhaps you think of its equally strange cousin, Edestus, the scissor-toothed shark, whose jaws grew in strange outward curving arcs, like a pair of pinking shears. These creatures were the epitome of Permian weirdness, evolutionary experiments that pushed the boundaries of vertebrate anatomy. And for a very long time, it was a mainstream paleontological belief that these magnificent weirdos, along with 96% of all other marine life, had perished in the fiery apocalypse of the Great Dying. They were a symbol of a lost world, a branch on the tree of life that had been decisively and permanently pruned, and then, at some point, a shocking discovery came to light. In the rock layers after the extinction boundary, in the strange, simplified world of the Induan, paleontologists began finding their unmistakable world teeth. The Buzzsaw sharks had survived. They had weathered the apocalypse. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, the giant, bus-sized helicoprion was not among the survivors. The creatures that made it through were much smaller, more modest members of the family, but they were no less strange. The first of these unlikely holdovers was a genus called Pangea. It was a much smaller type, measuring about 1.5 meters or 5 feet in length, a far cry from its giant Permian cousins. But it still had that remarkably strange family face. Its upper jaw was elongated into a pointed, spear-like rostrum, but its lower jaw carried the family's iconic signature, a spiraling tooth whirl designed for crushing or shearing shelled prey. Swimming alongside it was another survivor, a closely related genus named Cynodonts. It was a shark of nearly exact proportions and likely a similar diet, but it had a more conventional look, lacking the elongated upper nose and not really keeping up with the full, wheeled face aesthetic of its cousin. Finding either of these in the post-apocalyptic ocean would be like finding a living, breathing dinosaur in our modern world. A ghost from a lost age, a living fossil that had somehow, against all odds, cheated extinction. The survival of these bizarre, buzzsaw-jawed fish was a shocking discovery, a testament to life's improbable resilience. But the story gets even stranger. It turns out that Pangea and Cynodonts were not the only members of this weird extended family of sharks to make it through the apocalypse. The survival of this ancient and peculiar lineage was even more widespread than we first thought, involving another closely related family of cartilaginous nightmares, the Eidistids. If helicoprion and its kin were the Buzzsaw sharks, the Eidistids were the scissor-faced sharks, and they were arguably even more alien in their appearance. This family is known for its truly iconic and deeply unsettling mouth structure. Instead of a whorl, their teeth grew in strange curved blade-like rows that gave their mouths the appearance of being vertically split, functioning less like a jaw and more like a pair of flesh-cutting shears. It is a body plan that has no modern equivalent, a biological experiment that was seemingly unique to the ancient Paleozoic seas. And just like their buzzsaw cousins, they were thought to have been completely annihilated by the Great Dying, another casualty of a bygone era. But again, the fossil record held a surprise. Swimming in those same Induan waters was a genus called Paradestus. This was not just another buzzsaw survivor. It was a type of Eidistid, a true scissor-faced shark that had somehow weathered the storm. Its mouth contained an interesting blend of teeth. Some were flattened and pavement-like, likely for crushing, while others, particularly on the bottom jaw, were sharp and could cut you. This strange mix makes its exact diet a mystery. But whatever it ate, it was a strategy that was successful enough to carry it through the single worst extinction event of all time. And what's truly remarkable is that these creatures, these ghosts from a lost world, seem to have found a common sanctuary. A particularly quirky paleontological tidbit is that many of these survivors are found together in one specific location. In the stunning wilderness of British Columbia, Canada, lies a world-renowned fossil site called Wapiti Lake. The rocks here preserve a snapshot of a coastal marine environment from the early Triassic, a window into what was swimming off the northwestern coast of Pangea. And it is here, in this one fossil bed, that the ghosts have all gathered. Paleontologists have unearthed the remains of the buzz-saw-jawed Fidania, its cousin Caseodus, and the scissor-faced Paradestus, all living side by side in the same ecosystem. This suggests that these cool, temperate waters were a crucial post-apocalyptic refuge, a sanctuary where the last of the world's great weirdos could make their final stand. You are not just seeing one impossible survivor, you are seeing an entire community of them, the last remnants of a truly alien dynasty clinging together in a shared haven at the edge of a ruined world. And so, for a brief, strange moment in the aftermath of the apocalypse, the coastal waters of Pangea hosted a ghostly renaissance. It was a world of biological antiques, an ecosystem populated by the living dead. The new kings, the hardy bony fish, swam as the dominant predators, a vision of the ocean's future. But alongside them, like phantoms from a forgotten age, cruised the last of the world's great weirdos. The buzz-saw-jawed Fidania, the scissor-faced Paradestus, and their strange kin were all here, the final improbable holdovers from a lost Permian world. An encounter in these waters would have been utterly surreal, a journey through a living museum where the exhibits of two completely different geological eras were swimming together in the same purple-hued tank. This improbable coexistence raises a fascinating and crucial mystery that paleontologists are still trying to solve. In this new, impoverished world, what on earth were they eating? Their entire anatomy, the very jaws that make them so iconic, were highly specialized tools. The tooth whorls of the Eugenodonts and the shearing blades of the Adestids were precision instruments, evolved over millions of years to deal with specific types of prey, most likely the abundant, hard-shelled creatures of the Permian seas. But the Great Dying had been a catastrophe for shelled life. The ocean's acidity had devastated the clams, the sea snails, the brachiopods, and the complex ammonites that likely formed the core of their diet. The buffet was closed. So how did they survive? The leading theory is that they became hyper-specialized hunters of the few shelled survivors. Life, in its tenacity, had seen some hardy lineages of ammonites, those coiled, shelled relatives of modern squid, and bivalves cling on through the extinction. In a world with few other shell-crushing competitors, perhaps these last bizarre predators were able to eke out a living by focusing exclusively on these tough, resilient morsels. They may have become the ultimate niche specialists in a world of generalists. Another possibility is that they underwent a radical dietary shift. Perhaps their strange jaws were more versatile than they appear, and they adapted to hunt the now abundant, soft-bodied, bony fish, using their whirls and shears not to crush, but to grip and slice. We may never know for sure, but their mere presence is a testament to the fact that they found a way to make a living on a planet that had seemingly erased their entire menu. But this ghostly renaissance, this last stand of the weirdos, was destined to be a fleeting one. Their survival was a paradox. They were the champions of a bygone era, masters of a game whose rules had been completely rewritten. As the millions of years of the early Triassic slowly ticked by, the planet continued its long, slow convalescence. The oceans gradually became more stable and more productive. Life began to diversify again, and new, more modern-looking predators started to appear on the scene. The first of the great ichthyosaurs, the dolphin-like marine reptiles, began to slice through the waters with breathtaking speed and efficiency. New, faster, and more adaptable lineages of sharks began to evolve. The world was becoming more competitive, more complex, more dangerous. And in this recovering world, the ancient survivors were an anachronism. Their strange, highly specialized bodies, the very tools that may have helped them squeak through the extinction, now became an evolutionary dead end. They were too slow, too strange, too inflexible to compete with the new wave of predators. By the time the Middle Triassic dawned, they were all gone. Every last one of them vanished from the fossil record, this time for good. They had accomplished the impossible, surviving the single greatest biological catastrophe the world has ever known. But in a final tragic irony, they could not survive the recovery. The 2 million years of the Induan epoch, this planetary-scale state of shock, finally drew to a close. But there was no grand ceremony, no sudden dramatic shift. The end of this disaster world was not an event, but a slow, almost imperceptible thaw, a gradual loosening of the stranglehold of extinction. As you stand on the shores of the Paleotethys Sea and look forward in time, you would see the planet beginning the long, arduous, and almost unimaginably slow road to recovery. The changes would be subtle at first, almost invisible on the scale of a human lifetime, but monumental on the scale of geological time. The world was beginning to heal. The first signs of this slow thaw would be written not in the fossil record, but in the chemistry of the rocks themselves. The dark, anoxic shales that characterized the Induan seafloor would slowly begin to lighten in color, a geological sign that oxygen was once again beginning to penetrate the deep oceans, breaking down the toxic chemical soup and allowing more complex life to breathe. The purple and green sulfur bacteria that had colored the seas would recede from the coasts, banished back to the anoxic depths as the waters cleared. The reign of the microbial reefs would also begin its slow decline. Geological evidence from the Middle Triassic shows the first tentative reappearance of tiny, hardy, pioneering species of coral. These were not the grand, complex structures of the Permian, but small, humble colonies, the first brave architects attempting to rebuild the ocean's great cities after a 10-million-year absence. The world was beginning to remember how to build. On land, the fossil record tells a similar story of gradual change. The absolute near monocultural dominance of Lystrosaurus finally began to wane. As the climate stabilized and the flora slowly diversified, new ecological niches began to open up, and life, in its relentless opportunism, began to fill them. New kinds of herbivores evolved, some larger, some faster, some more specialized in their diets. The endless, monotonous herds of the pig-like survivor were now joined by other creatures. The predators, in turn, diversified to hunt this new menu of prey. The food web, which had been a simple flat line for millions of years, was beginning to add new, tentative threads, slowly reweaving itself into something more complex and resilient. The great silence was beginning to be broken by the sounds of a more varied world. But we must be careful not to understate the sheer, mind-bending immensity of the timescale involved. The video mentions a stunning figure. It would ultimately take the Earth some 50 million years to fully recover its pre-extinction levels of biodiversity. Let that number settle in your mind for a moment. 50 million years. It's a span of time that is almost impossible for a human mind to truly grasp. Let's try to put it in perspective. The entire Ice Age, with all its glaciers and mammoths and human migrations, hasn't even been going on for that long in totality. Our own species, Homo sapiens, with all our history, our art, our civilizations, our triumphs and follies, has only existed for about 300,000 years. The recovery from this one event took over 160 times longer than the entire existence of humanity. Imagine every single thing that has ever happened in human history. The building of the pyramids, the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, the Digital Age. And now imagine that entire timeline, from the first cave painting to the device you are using right now, repeating itself, end to end, 166 times. That is the span of time it took for the planet to simply get back to where it was before the Siberian traps erupted. It is a humbling and profound lesson in planetary resilience and the true, deep time scale of life. The recovery was not a sprint. It was a slow, multi-generational crawl through geological epochs, a testament to the fact that while extinction can be terrifyingly fast, creation and healing are processes of deep, patient, and inexorable time. And so, as the planet finally exits its long, feverish nightmare, you are left with a final, profound realization. The Great Dying, for all its apocalyptic horror, was not just an ending. It was a violent and agonizing birth. It was the universe pressing a giant, fiery reset button on the biosphere. The complex, beautiful, and stable world of the Permian was gone. But in its destruction, it created a world of unparalleled opportunity. The slate had been wiped clean, the ecological chessboard cleared of almost all its pieces. This act of near-total annihilation was also an act of creation, creating a blank canvas upon which evolution could now paint its next, and perhaps strangest, masterpiece. The recovery period that followed the Induan, the Middle Triassic, was a time of wild, unbridled evolutionary experimentation, a biological Cambrian explosion in miniature. With so many empty ecological niches, life went a little crazy, producing some of the most bizarre and legitimately strange animals of all time. You would have witnessed creatures like Tanistropheus, a reptile with a body the size of a large lizard, but a neck that was an astonishing 3 times longer than its torso, a living, breathing fishing rod that it used to snatch fish from the sea. You might have seen Drepanosaurus, a chameleon-like reptile with a bird-like head, a huge claw on each hand, and a strange prehensile tail that ended in a bony hook. These weren't just animals. They were life's fever dreams, evolution throwing every strange idea at the wall to see what would stick in this new, empty world. From the crucible of the Induan, 2 great dynasties had emerged to shape the future. In the shadows, our own distant kin, the Cynodonts, continued their quiet, humble existence. They survived by being small, adaptable, and clever, honing the mammalian traits of warm-bloodedness, parental care, and complex teeth. They were playing the long game, biding their time, a dynasty in waiting. But the immediate future did not belong to them. It belonged to the other great survivors, the archosaurs. Having gotten their start as the humble, crocodile-like proterosuchids, they seized their moment with unparalleled success. Paleontologists still fiercely debate the exact reason for their triumph over the surviving synapsids. Was it their more efficient, one-way breathing system, their evolving upright posture, or simply a case of being better adapted to the hot, arid world? Whatever the reason, their victory was total. From their lineage would spring the dinosaurs, who would rise to rule the planet for the next 150 million years in a reign of unimaginable length and success. The entire Mesozoic era, the age of reptiles, was born from the ashes of the Great Dying. As you finally turn away from this ancient, alien world, you are left with a final, quiet thought about resilience. Life on this planet was pushed to the absolute, knife-edge brink of total extinction. It was reduced to a handful of the toughest weeds, the most resilient burrowers, and the luckiest survivors. The world became a ghost of itself, a silent, empty, and hostile wasteland. But from that near-total ruin, from that planetary graveyard, it did not just recover, it produced wonders anew. The story of the Great Dying and the strange world that followed is not just a tale of death. It is the ultimate story of survival, a testament to the stubborn, indomitable, and endlessly creative force of life itself, a force that, even in the face of near oblivion, finds a way to begin again. And so our long journey through this ghost world comes to a gentle close. The hazy, brownish sun of the early Triassic begins to fade from your mind, replaced by the soft, familiar darkness of your own room. The thin, sulphurous air gives way to the gentle, rhythmic pattern of your own quiet breathing. The vast, silent plains of Pangea dissolve, and you are left with the comfortable weight of your own blanket, a safe harbor far from the storms of that ancient, wounded planet. The story of those survivors, of their incredible, stubborn will to simply endure, is now a part of you. A quiet reminder of the immense and deep river of time that has flowed to bring you to this very moment, safe in your bed. The world outside your window is lush and green and filled with the complex chorus of life, a gift from the survivors of a catastrophe you can now let drift away. It's time to let the silence of that lost world become a peaceful quiet in your own mind, a stillness that invites rest. All the struggles of that distant past are over. All the great monsters have faded to dust and dreams. And now, you can let your own thoughts soften, your muscles relax, and allow yourself to drift into a deep and well-earned sleep.